Good morning and happy Halloween, everyone, and welcome to our Energy Storage Enhancements Final Proposal meeting. Today, October 31st, we kick things off with a call, and I'm here, Brenda Corona from Stakeholder Affairs at the California ISO, and I'll be helping facilitate this meeting. And I'm also joined by Gabe Murtaugh, Storage Sector Manager and Market and Infrastructure Policy. For us to get things started, we have an agenda to go over today. I'll be going over one slide of the stakeholder process timeline, and then Gabe will go over the next three items, which are the policy summary and additional Q&A, and then I'll go over the next steps. For this call, we also want to remind everyone that it's being recorded for informational purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. For those who have any questions about the posting of this document, it's under Policy Initiative under Energy Storage Enhancements. For those who also on the phone line, feel free to press #2 to ask any questions as well. Submit your virtual raise hand icon above the chat window. We will also have help from myself and Silas, who's the event producer, so send those chat questions over and make sure to add your affiliation so we can know who you're talking. So remember, for everyone on the phone, please state your name and affiliation before saying a comment, and we will be kicking things off with this initiative stakeholder process where we're currently at the final proposal. We are after that will be the decision, and then we will hopefully go to implementation. But other than that, we accomplished a few milestones for this call. And now I'll go ahead and introduce Gabe to put on his video and test audio with us to kick things off for the next slides.
Thank you, Brenda. Good morning, everyone. And yes, happy Halloween for this very spooky edition of the final proposal for the Energy Storage Enhancements Policy. I had many people request that I dress up as a battery today for this meeting. I am not in a battery costume. Maybe but in your mind's eye, you can imagine me putting one on later today. So think about that if that helps you get through this meeting today. Okay, so where are we? I think Brenda summarized that we're in the final proposal stage of the policy. That means, for the most part, that the policy development in this particular initiative is done. I will add, I know we've had a lot of discussions over the last month and a half about this particular topic, and we've had a meeting with the Market Surveillance Committee. We also, a few weeks ago, had a workshop where we were thinking about some of the challenges that that the operators are facing when they're trying to operate the grid and they're relying on a lot of storage to provide ancillary services, and sort of what the ISO's thinking was with that, and sort of where we were in terms of this policy and our proposal. I think, along with all of our policies, this is never or almost never the final word on where we're ever going to land on policy. And particularly since this is storage and the technology is so new, we've continued to receive a lot of comments that kind of say, hey, is the ISO going to continue investigating and provide data on this? For the new policies that are put in place, is the ISO going to evaluate the efficacy of these programs? I think the answer unilaterally across the board is yes. The ISO thinks today that these policies will be effective in preventing and addressing some of the problems that we have out on the grid. Today, when we're operating storage resources, it's going to help us better operate the grid. It's going to help developers and the parties, load serving entities that are operating storage resources better utilize tools that we have in our grid. But we know for sure that storage is a very new technology. There's going to be even more advances in storage in the next few years. And as this technology advances, we also are going to need new policy or potentially adjustments to this policy in order to maintain the grid as best we can and to offer the absolute best in terms of modeling and solutions for reliable grid operations. So that's where we are today. I think, and I hope everybody on this call is also aware, the ISO actually has two other initiatives that are currently open that are dealing with storage resources. We haven't, I'm the primary resource internally that's working on these policies, so that's why we haven't seen much movement on them in the last few months. But there will be movement happening almost immediately after this meeting. So we also are working on the Ancillary Service State of Charge initiative. That's a very specific targeted initiative to think about the filing that the ISO made back in September to request some changes in settlements for an issue that the Department of Market Monitoring flagged and that the ISO wanted to take care of very quickly. We promised, and we're going to keep that promise, to look at other potential avenues to address that same issue, and we will be talking about that through the typical stakeholder process. Since it is so targeted and focused, the stakeholder process may be a little bit shorter than other processes, but that is ongoing right now. We also have the Storage Modeling Enhancements Initiative, and that was sort of a spinoff from this initiative. It specifically is thinking, I think the bulk of that policy is thinking about the policy where we're talking about enhancing the model for storage resources and specifically allowing storage resources to bid in terms of state of charge price pairs instead of today where they're bidding in terms of megawatt or power price pairs. And I think there's some other issues that are going to be included in that initiative as well. I think it's also the scope of that policy is also open right now, so there is opportunity to add additional items if there are concerns. But I know we've gotten a lot of feedback on things like the foldback issue, and we definitely want to tackle that in storage modeling enhancements. My hope is that hopefully sometime this year, in the remainder of 2022, we can have a workshop or two to talk about some of the tools. Perhaps those workshops will even be in person. We haven't received final word on whether or not that's going to happen or not. But my fingers are crossed, and I keep putting in the requests, and I know that's an issue and something that a lot of stakeholders have been asking for. So that's kind of the landscape right now with what's going on with storage policy, just in general. Specifically for this storage policy, I know we had in previous meetings talked about this potentially going to the Board of Governors in October. Obviously, that is not the case, as October has come and gone at this point. We are planning to take this issue to the Board of Governors meeting in December of this year. I think that is, at this point, all but fixed. So we are on a glide path to discuss this particular issue item at our December Board of Governors meeting, which I think is mid-December, maybe the 11th or 13th or something. But it's actually, even though December sounds relatively far away, it's coming up quite quickly. So there's a lot of things internally that have to happen to get this piece of policy ready. With that in mind, getting on to the material that's included in this slide, the policy continues to cover 6 different items, and I think these are largely unchanged from the previous version of the proposal, the draft final proposal, and largely that proposal was unchanged from the previous iteration before that, the second revised straw proposal. But we've got 3 issues related to reliability. 2 of those specific topics have to do with ancillary services. One of those topics has to do with exceptional dispatch that's specifically related to storage resources and the compensation for that exceptional dispatch. Those are all tied to reliably operating the grid with storage resources. We also have 2 enhancements that we're making to the co-located model itself. One, which had been, a fairly big ask, and I think this was a little bit more challenging in terms of policy design. But it's an electable model where co-located storage resources can select an option to prevent grid charging. And again, this is something that we've heard a lot of feedback from stakeholders on They like the hybrid model because it can prevent them from grid charging. They like the co-located model because of the settlements implications between the technologies that could be at one particular facility location. So could we potentially have a model that combines those two? And I think we've done that here with the enhancements to the co-located model. The fifth one, and this is kind of one that's been a little bit smaller and a little bit less contentious, is around expanding the pseudo-tie model to include functionality similar to the co-located model. So if you do have a co-located facility outside of the ISO and you want to pseudo-tie it into the ISO, we're going to allow for that functionality here in this policy. Finally, there was a request, and this came a little bit later on in the development of this policy, to enhance the day-ahead default energy bid. And since this was a little bit more of a recent addition to the policy, I think there has been more in the way of comments on this aspect of the policy in the or on the draft final proposal. And I think we said this when we initially took this on as part of the scope of this initiative, but we wanted to keep this really targeted. We didn't necessarily want to reopen discussion of the entire default energy bid and how the ISO formulates that default energy bid. We really wanted to keep this as an aspect of the policy of, gee, should the ISO add opportunity costs to the day-ahead default energy bid or not? And I think the policy is yes, we're planning to add a new term to the default energy bid. Again, I do think that there will be an opportunity to reinvestigate that default energy bid if we need to. And I also think, or the ISO continues to offer a negotiated default energy bid. So if there are market participants that feel like the default energy bid doesn't cover their marginal costs, there is another way that you can come in and negotiate that with the Department of Market Monitoring or with Guillermo's team, the market validation team, to get those details worked out. Brenda, did you have something to add?
Yes, we do have a few questions coming in, so
Great.
Let me know when you're ready for those.
Yeah, I do have, so just a little bit of a high level overview here. I'm going to talk about each one of these topics individually. So if anybody has a question about, the overall policy or the process, I think I can definitely field those questions now. I would also add, I'm just doing one slide on each of these topics today. I'm not really getting to get into details unless there's a specific request. If we do have a request for some of the details, I've got a whole slew of slides in the appendices, and we can get into some of these details if we want. So Brenda, I think with that, yeah, let's open it up and see what questions we've got out there.
As we move into Q&A, we will be accepting questions both through the chat and verbal questions. To submit a written question, please select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. To enter the verbal question queue, please press the raise hand icon on your screen to enter the question queue. You will hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. For our phone-only line, you can dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Once again, on WebEx, that's the raised hand icon, and on the phone-only line, that is #2 on your telephone keypad. Looks like we have a couple questions that have entered the queue so far. Caller, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Gabe. This is Elvis Svoboda from BG&E. How are you? Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to, on the top level, just ask whether the ancillary service state of charge initiative has relevance just because you put it into the tariff and it will be in place for the next year or so at least. But I would think there should be some consideration in this final proposal about whether you can state that disallowance of bid cost recovery will be removed due to the changes you're making. It seems to me that at least that should be considered. I mean, I would favor that, but I don't know what your thinking is, given the fact that you're requiring energy bids to to support corrections and that you are taking steps internally to avoid the kind of situation happening, but that nevertheless these are not, entirely going to be able to prevent every situation in which this might happen. And it seems to me that some of your rationale in the tariff change should be questioned after these changes are made, and that you should actually explicitly say something about that, independent of the initiative. So I just wanted to make that a comment question and see what your thinking was on that.
Yeah, I think there's certainly going to be some discussion in the transmittal letter when we send this to FERC, sort of about the interactions between this and the other things that DMM has identified. I don't know that this necessarily, internally, obviously, we've had a lot of thought and discussion about this, and I don't think this really changes our position on where we are in terms of policy for energy storage enhancements. I do think that sort of all three, the two aspects that we're proposing in this policy and, sort of what we've already got out there in the ancillary service, what we've already filed at FERC for the ancillary service state of charge constraint, all kind of do different things. I think.
I'm not sure if I agree, because if you are required to put in an energy bid for the very purpose you're disallowing bid cost recovery for, then essentially, and that is what these bids will be used, when these bids will be used or can be used.
Schedules are still unrealizable. One of the resources is out of state of charge, and they're supposed to be providing reg up. Those bids are going to help us, which we're requiring in this policy, are going to help us be able to charge that resource up so that it can continue to provide those regulating services. And then the other policy, the ancillary service state of charge constraint initiative, has to do with, when that resource does get dispatched and that dispatch is economic, how do we compensate those resources? I think the current rules that we've proposed and are out there and being decided by FERC right now sort of suggest that storage resources shouldn't get any additional compensation. I think we want to have that stakeholder discussion to think about the compensation to make sure we get it right. But it is a slightly different topic than we're going to cover here. But I like your thinking that it certainly is interrelated with the discussions that we're having in this initiative. And we're going to want to talk about it in our transmittal letter and how these three things are related. But at a very high level, that's kind of how I see the relation forming right now.
Okay, well, I do think it would be good to have some comment on this in the actual initiative that you bring to the board as well. I mean, it's not just a question of FERC, it's a question of, are you essentially going to say that people are going to be compelled to put in energy bids and they're not going to receive compensation for them in many scenarios? So, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Alva. We'll definitely think about how we want to craft that, and I agree with you. I think it's worth saying something about at the Board of Governors meeting.
Thanks.
Yep, appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, Gabe. It's Mike McGuffin from CES. So since the last iteration, we obviously had an epic event that we still haven't seen the formal analysis of what happened, but generally it sounded like best performance was applauded. It seemed like things went relatively well. But it seems like a golden opportunity now to take a look at some of the proposals, look back at that period, see what worked, what didn't, and how some of these proposals may have improved or not the actual performance in the market during that period. So I know there's been a lot of requests for providing some analysis to justify making some of these proposals. Have you done, or your team done, any analysis on the heat wave period, or is there an intent to do so before you file or seek board approval?
Yeah, I don't know I think that's a great question, Mike, and thanks for asking it. I don't know the exact status of this report, but Guillermo's team, the market validation team, is currently doing a very large, very broad report of basically performance over the summer. There's a whole section, and it involves more than 100 pages of discussion just on what happened during that high heat period in early September. I don't know for sure if that paper has been published yet or not, but it spends a lot of time talking about the storage fleet, what it was doing, and kind of some of what we saw during those few days of operating the storage fleet. We also have general insights as to what the storage resources were doing over the course of the entire summer. So that report is forthcoming if it's not out there already, and I know Guillermo is going to spend some time discussing that publicly. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff about storage resources. I think.
Well, I can imagine. But is there any effort to sort of draw some lines between some of the observations and what you are proposing specifically in this initiative? I mean, I think you could see, all of the bidding pattern issues we discussed, how the MSOC worked, exceptional dispatch use in general, AGC performance of the best under very stressed conditions. I mean, there's so much that can be taken from that period that I think would, it's not going to get any worse than that experience. I'll just put my neck out there and say it's probably going to be the biggest, market event we see for a long time. So if BEST performed well and some of these proposals may have made things worse or better, it would be helpful to understand that linkage.
Frankly, Mike, I don't know if we're going to be publishing anything publicly that talks about specifically these proposals and how they might have helped or hurt during like that extreme heat event in September. Internally, though, I can promise you we've had a lot of discussions with the data analysis team and with the operations team about specific resources, what was specifically going on with those resources during that high heat period in September. And from those discussions, I think we, as the ISO, still feel very comfortable that this proposal is going to help us going forward and could have improved outcomes during that September timeframe.
Okay. Yeah. Just again, I think there's been a request for more analysis from the market as a whole throughout this period. We're at the end of the road, it seems like. So I would just encourage the ISO to produce any analysis you can. And then I noticed, I don't think there was any additional analysis included in the final proposal, at least that I saw, on or discussion about the potential for improvements to the AGC dispatch and some transparency around that process. Have any discussions happened around that issue?
No, I think, we obviously did present some additional data in that meeting that we had a few weeks ago when we did the storage workshop, and then we obviously presented some data when we were at the Market Surveillance Committee meeting also a few weeks ago, and those are all up on the website. But since that time, we have not done any initial analysis, and that, obviously, there's no additional analysis in the final proposal. I totally understand your request for additional analysis. I will continue to escalate that, and as we can get it, if in between now and the board date we can publish even more, I will continue to advocate for that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the request, Mike. I do think it's important, and I think it could really help just articulate why we need some of these features.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Good morning, Callie.
Good morning. Actually, just to follow up on that last conversation, or I guess request, if I can add something to that, and it'd be more documentation on how the agency actually makes the decision as to which resources to lean on or to deploy for regulation. I think having that additional transparency documented somewhere would be extremely helpful, because I've searched all the documents and I think there's maybe one or a couple sentences in a BPM somewhere that talks about how it does it at a high level. So I think if there's a way you guys can document that a little bit more detailed, it would be really useful.
I tend to agree, and that is one of the areas that I think is a bit of a black box as well. And frankly, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll take that back, Callie. I appreciate the feedback.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions, operator?
There are no other questions in the queue at this time.
Okay. So why don't we advance to the next slide? Oh, Brenda, if you could advance the next slide. I don't know. I might be on a little bit of a delay here. Anyway, yeah, I think the first main topic that I wanted to cover was the two ancillary service provisions. I do realize that, oh, maybe we're having some technical difficulties here, because I don't think, Brenda, are you online? Can you hear me? Lost. Go. Ah, there we go. It's advanced. I think we've just got some slow technology over here. So apologies for that. So yeah, the first thing I wanted to talk about were the two proposals around ancillary services. I do think that this obviously was the area, particularly around proposal number 2, where we had the most feedback. And, you know, I would just add, we do take this feedback incredibly seriously. You know, we don't want to develop policy that is going to run counter to, you know, running efficient markets. So we are, you know, and have thought very hard about that feedback and what we could possibly do. I think at this point, the ISO is still planning to move forward with the proposal that we have in place, with, I think, the one change that I've noted here in italics. But the first aspect of this policy, so number 1 on this slide, is that we're planning to update the state of charge equation so that it reflects regulation awards today. State of charge is governed by energy awards. So if you get an energy award for positive energy, that's going to discharge the battery, so it's going to reduce your state of charge. If you get an award for negative energy, that's going to charge your battery. We do include round trip efficiencies. So if there's losses associated with charging and discharging the battery, we include those in the state of charge formula. However, if a particular resource has, you know, comes into the day ahead market and has a particular state of charge, that resource, the way we model it today, that state of charge doesn't change over the course of the day, regardless of what the schedule is, if it's only getting awards for regulation up and regulation down. And even if it gets an award at Pmax for regulation up all 24 hours, that state of charge doesn't actually change. Although we know for sure that if that resource is actually providing regulation up over time, the resource will slowly be depleted in terms of state of charge. So the idea is that we're going to update our state of charge formula to include regulation up awards and regulation down awards. obviously, if you're providing 100 megawatts of regulation up, you're very, very unlikely to discharge a full 100 megawatt hours from your aggregate state of charge. If you are that resource, you're going to discharge some fraction of it because the AGC signals are going to be sending you up and down during that period. So there's going to be a multiplier associated with, oh my, I am getting a note that says everybody has lost audio. Operator, Silas, can you hear me right now?
I can hear you. We are currently troubleshooting the problem.
Okay.
Hey, Gabe, I'm also back online, just
Okay.
letting you know.
All right. Do we just want to take a minute if people are having trouble with audio, or how do we want to address this? Oh, I think I saw a message from Perry. Maybe audio is working for some audience members, but not for other audience members. Okay, I'm going to continue. I'm getting quite a few messages that say I am able to hear. Yeah, okay, and I think some folks have maybe redialed and are able to hear me as well. Okay, yeah, I'm getting a message from our technical team saying redialing will likely work. So hopefully folks who can't hear have already thought about that and have disconnected and are trying to reconnect. And I think quite a few participants still can hear me. So in the event you can't, please message. Yeah, in the event you can't hear me, please message please message Brenda, I guess, and maybe our event coordinator, and hopefully we can get some technical assistance out there. But I think audio is working for most. I'm seeing a lot of positive messages, so that's a good sign. So anyway, yeah, we are planning to implement additions to our state of charge formula. It's going to include not just those energy awards, but also the ancillary service awards, and will be some fraction of the ancillary service awards, and that fraction will be determined based on which hour of the day. And we're also planning to look at that, I would say at least on a quarterly basis, but perhaps on as frequently as on a monthly basis, to ensure that those numbers aren't changing too much. Obviously, the demands we have on regulation up and regulation down change from month to month, season to season, and you're very likely to use different amounts of reg up during your peak spring season compared to kind of the shoulders going from spring into summer, and then obviously different demands on regulation up and regulation down in the summertime. So that's kind of what we're thinking about there. The second one, and this is number 2 on the slide, is a little bit more controversial. And this one is the one where we're requiring bids, so energy bids, alongside ancillary service awards. The idea here is that if a storage resource does get itself into a situation where it's providing, for example, regulation up and is fully depleted in terms of state of charge, that the ISO, the market software, has some bidding range for charging energy that's submitted to the market, and it could actually dispatch the resource to charge if it needed to. Again, the idea for the first proposal is that our state of charge formula is going to better align with regulation awards in general. So hopefully we don't get in these situations, but we're certainly not ruling out that there couldn't be a situation where a resource is scheduled to provide regulation up, and for whatever reason it doesn't have state of charge in the RTD market. In that case, we do want to have a little bit of wiggle room to be able to charge the resource so that it can continue to provide these ancillary services. I think the ISO has gone through some discussions about these specific circumstances. There are today certainly circumstances where the ISO is relying on storage resources to provide ancillary services, and those resources can't. And some of the time, those reasons why the resources can is because they're out of state of charge. And that, obviously having bids to charge could help alleviate these situations. And we think looking at the data internally and thinking about this policy, that this will help in that regard. One of the comments that we did get on the draft final proposal was to only apply bidding rules in the real-time market. I think we agree with that, and I think there was some other support from a few stakeholders in the comments for something like this. If a storage resource doesn't have an obligation to bid energy into the day-ahead market, and they don't want to bid energy into the day-ahead market, I think that's fine. We obviously still will schedule or award the resource, ancillary service awards that will allow them to make those bids in the real-time market, but we're certainly not going to, like insert bids or anything like that into a day-ahead market. In the future, and again, I think there were quite a few comments on this, but what about tailoring this requirement even more? What if a resource is, completely charged in the real-time market and it's got an award for regulation up? Should it still have this bidding requirement? I think the ISO is open to the idea of, thinking about how we could adapt this rule, or potentially even if we need this rule in the future. We're certainly going to be doing analysis on the efficacy of this rule as we go forward if it does get implemented and approved by FERC. So we do want to continue to think about this and think about how it impacts resources and think about the way that we can minimize requirements on resources, but again, still be able to fully rely on these resources to provide these services when they are signed up and awarded them in our day-ahead and real-time markets. And just the note that we've talked about, but the ISO still believes, and I think this is also echoed by some of the stakeholder comments, that both solutions are likely necessary for reliability, at least with where we are right now with issues and conditions that we're seeing with actual storage resources that are operating on our grid today. I saw a few comments in the chat. I'm going to see if I can speak to those right now. So I got one from Hillary Hibbert from HMH Energy. And Hillary asks, can you please explain this energy bid requirement fits in with the Flex RA must offer obligations for the real-time market? Okay, so storage resources, or all resources that are shown for resource adequacy, have bidding obligations into both the day-ahead markets and the real-time markets. If you're shown just for system or local RA, the bidding requirements are a little bit different than the bidding requirements for Flex RA. Flex RA, of course, can span the entire operating range of the resource, so from PMIN to PMAX. System and local RA can only be for the positive operating range for storage resources. So if you're storage resource and you're shown for system or local RA, you may have obligations to bid that positive, or you will have obligations to bid that positive energy that you're shown for into the day-ahead and real-time markets. If you are shown for flexible resource adequacy, you could have obligations to bid, charging potentially your entire range of operating capacity, that's charging and discharging capacity, into the market. This is a little bit different. It's similar because it is a bidding obligation, but it's a little bit different that says, okay, if I have an ancillary service award, let's just say for 100 megawatts of regulation up, and I'm awarded that obviously through the typical day-ahead market process, then once I've received that award, I now have an obligation to bid 50 megawatts of charging capability into the real-time market. There is no associated day-ahead bidding obligation. It's just a real-time bidding obligation. So it is a little bit different. Brenda, do we have any questions on the phone?
It looks like we don't have any questions on our phone-only line so far, but we do have some hands up in WebEx whenever you would like to take those.
Sure. Let's go ahead and take those right now.
Gabe, it's Grant McDaniel with Wellhead. Just curious, for the bidding requirement, I'm not sure why we were going to require bids if there's not going to be any BCR. So is it possible to consider just using the default energy bids, period, for regulation? That way the cost of providing the service is known to the operator, right? Or the owner of the resource.
Mm-hmm.
And then the opportunity cost can be reflected in the regulation bid, the capacity. Mm-hmm. And that way you would have BCR to be available. You make sure that you always at least covered your default energy bid. I mean, that seems like that could be a pretty clean system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, I think we've heard some of this feedback in the ancillary service state of charge discussions that we've had. Well, the one discussion that we had at the Market Surveillance Committee meeting. And I think this is definitely something that the ISO wants to probe into a little bit further. But I think you're absolutely right. This could be one way to kind of get at a solution here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would certainly add that what we have proposed at FERC currently isn't a blanket prohibition against bid cost recovery for storage resources. It's only it's a change for the rules around when storage resources get bid cost recovery, and specifically if these rules are charging because of an ancillary service state of charge constraint, that would be a specific interval when that resource wouldn't be eligible for bid cost recovery. Obviously, if it's getting an exceptional dispatch at the same time, that would be compensated at the current exceptional dispatch compensation rules, which could include uplift. But thanks for the comment, Graham. Are there other questions or hands up, Silas?
Yes. This is Brenda. We can go to Susan line. Let's get her unmuted first.
Oh. Hi, this is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me, Gabe?
I can. Good morning, Susan.
Morning. I just had a quick question. I know you guys for the adjustments for energy and the ancillary services awards, you guys had put out some estimates of the adjustment factors, but I think it was for a very small, limited time, like for a month or two. So I'm wondering if it would be possible, just so people could have some idea of what this might look like based on historical data, if you might be able to go back further, say for a year's time, and just show people what maybe the monthly factors or something. Obviously without, snowing everyone's data, but if there's any way to put out even averages or some kind of indication of, the March through May period, I think was what you had looked at. And that's sort of the duck belly season there and may look different. So maybe some indication of what the size of those adjustment factors and the direction for maybe some of the other periods during the year, just so people have some idea of what to expect and can do their financial modeling and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable, Susan. So I do know for storage resources, we are planning to put all these multipliers in a BPM. We're also planning to put whatever methodology we ultimately settle on in the BPM. Obviously, there could be very, simplistic methodologies, maybe just looking at a simple average, on a monthly basis. And there could be more complex solutions. I think what we used in the paper was just the least squares error methodology to come up with the beta parameters or the mu parameters, I guess they are in the paper. But I do think at the very least these are going to be spelled out into what methodology we're using in the BPM. And I agree with you. I think there could be some evolution of what methodology is actually used and adopted over time. And then hopefully we'll also be able to share some analysis on, why we're picking certain solutions. And I think, like you say, let's look at a little bit of the historical data and see how this changes over time. I also appreciate that just even knowing some raw numbers on what these numbers look like over time could be helpful in bidding strategies going forward. So I'll also escalate that to our data analysis team and see if they can, think about publishing something like that. I don't know if that would be probably not in the BPM, but there's probably some other like monthly forums where data gets presented where that could be included, something like that.
Yeah, but I guess I'm asking maybe if there's something a little more, timely than, going through the BPM change management process for 3 months or something like that. I mean, this is a pretty significant change in the amount of ancillary services that a project might be awarded. And since a fair amount of the revenue could come from there, then it really will affect financial projections and economic analyses for these projects. And so given that it could be a big deal where you're reducing the amount of ancillary services by say 5 or 10%. That's a lot. And so if there's just any indication that doesn't take several months to get out there, just so people can have those in mind when they're trying to execute PPAs or whatever it is they're doing, it really would be helpful to get that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Susan. I'll pass that on.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks, Gabe.
Yep. Any other hands up?
Yeah, we can go to Perry line first. Thank you.
Hey, Gabe. Perry Servideo, GDS. Can you hear me?
Hey, morning, Perry.
Morning. I had, I first wanted to say that I've actually warmed up to this first proposal here. I think you guys hit the nail on the head there, after we work out the factors. But so my problem's more on the second proposal to require bids. And I just wanted to make sure, at this stage, I know it's late in the game for this proposal, but I just wanted to make sure that at least it's clear in my head exactly what the problem is, assuming that you've done the first proposal here. So I'll walk through it, maybe just sort of ask the question. In day-ahead market, I don't really see any issue, and you're not requiring bids in the energy bids alongside AS in the day-ahead market. And then you step in, you get into the 15-minute market, and there's already in the 15-minute market, there's already the AS SOC constraint there, and that should force charges or discharges to meet reg awards, and we know that it does that because that was the subject of the filing that you guys made at FERC. However, I think what you're flagging here is that constraint can't force a charge or discharge without having energy bids so that it can move the resource. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Perry.
Okay, so it's in FMM that we're looking to see if we can move the resource awards around, energy awards around to get it charged or discharged. So then when there's not enough energy bids, then today, that reg the market should be procuring that reg on other resources, and the resources that had the reg, the energy storage resources, should be getting a no pay. Is that what's happening today?
That can happen today, yeah.
Yeah, I would just think, the 15-minute market's looking to make sure you got enough AS as well and enough reg as well. And if it has the AS SOC constraint, so right here is where I'm sort of digging in a little bit and saying, well, if you have the AS SOC constraint and you know that the market can go and get the reg from other resources in the 15-minute market, if there's not enough energy bids on the energy storage resources, and the energy storage resources have to basically give back the day-ahead revenues. Where I'm really drilling here is you should be going into RTD with enough regulation to operate the system reliably. Is that not? Is there some other scenario that I'm missing here?
Yeah, I think we are concerned with the scenarios where, maybe it's a particularly large storage resource, potentially providing hundreds of megawatts of reg up, or more than 100 megawatts of reg up. That storage resource is depleted for state of charge in RTPD, so in the 15-minute market. We do have the ancillary service state of charge constraint there, but it's ineffective at charging the resource because there are no charging bids. So,
sure. And then,
yeah.
But FMM should then be giving them a zeroing out the AS award forcing the no pay, and then procuring the reg on other resources. Is it not doing that?
It can do that. So the market, obviously FMM, the 15-minute market is running, about 40 minutes prior to the actual real time that it's modeling. So in that 40-minute interval, you could potentially be operating a grid where you're relying on that resource for 40 minutes plus, and the resource really doesn't have any state of charge in that interval, and you could award it no pay in RTPD and eventually get a substitution resource online, but in that 40-minute window you can't, and you are kind of stuck with that resource in that window. So it's almost a timing issue.
Yeah, no, I had kind of set aside that scenario in my head because I'm assuming that once you're trying to account for that in the first proposal here. So if you have the first proposal there, that it hadn't occurred to me that once you have the first proposal that you would still be seeing that issue, because it should be looking ahead. You got the multi-interval optimization there. Should be looking ahead, seeing what the state of charge is going to be in every subsequent interval, and then making that decision.
Yeah, so in the day-ahead market, you certainly can get situations where, okay, you're scheduling a resource for, regulation up, and the resource receives regulation up hour after hour. And with this new proposal number 1, you're going to see decreases in the modeled state of charge hour after hour, reflecting essentially historical averages of what depletion you would typically see from a storage resource that's providing that level of ancillary services. Obviously, averages aren't representative of all intervals. You still could potentially be in a situation where, you're receiving hour after hour of regulation up awards. The day-ahead market anticipates the resource running out of state of charge or being, at the requirement for the ASSOC maybe at noon during the day. And in reality, maybe your resource runs out of state of charge at 9 a.m. because it's a particularly more volatile day, and you need more reg up, and you're actually calling on more reg up, and you're converting more of that regulation to energy in the real-time market. So in that scenario, you certainly could be in a situation in actual real-time operations where you don't have state of charge on a large storage resource, and you're counting on that large storage resource to provide ancillary services, and it can't do it in the real-time market. And if that resource has bids to charge, the ISO can, at 9 a.m., send a dispatch award to that resource in FMM and in RTD to say, hey, I need you to go out and charge a little bit so that you can provide regulation until noon, so we can get you through your regulation schedule that you signed up for in the day-ahead market.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's just that if you have the first proposal here, then if you do run out by the time you get to FMM, it should, standard functionality today, it should be trying to procure that off of different resources and forcing the no pay. I guess I wanted to just kind of make 2 points here. First is that if that all is working out, that's it'd be nice to see that. But I think that you'd be, unless FMM is not reprocuring reg on other resources, then you're going to be hard pressed to really show that there's actually a reliability problem here. Now, I understand operators, they don't want to see their AS moving around from resource to resource, from day ahead to real time. But to say a reliability problem for something like reg, which is almost a system-wide sort of requirement, is I think a little bit of a stretch here. Now, you may show that you could show that maybe I'm wrong there. That I'd be happy to see that information. And then the second point that I wanted to make here is that if resources are doing this and they're getting these huge reg awards that they can't meet throughout the day because let's say they're not managing their state of charge through their bids, and they're not putting in energy bids. I think usually if you're talking about needing to require energy bids, it usually means that there's a pricing problem. And I haven't seen you guys sort of take that route here yet. You're tackling one part of the pricing problem through the BCR issue that you guys have filed at FERC. So I think that's a big part of it, and you're going to get into that a little bit more in the next initiative on this. I just think that with what you have in that FERC filing and what you have in the first proposal here, I'm still puzzling over what reliability problem is left. And I'm happy to hear it from, if someone could just tell me what I'm missing there, that'd be great too.
Yeah, I think the one, just one of the things that I would give a little bit of feedback on is that, the FMM market is not an imbalanced market for ancillary service awards. In order to procure additional regulation, that requires an operator action. The idea is that most of the schedules should be fixed from their day-ahead AS awards through to the real-time awards. So it's not like the market, does that automatically and just says, okay, this guy's running a little low on state of charge, I'm just going to flip over to this other guy. So I do think that that's a little bit more complex.
Wait, let me just stop you there. I mean, if there are real-time AS bids, the market will procure additional AS if it sees that it can't, if it sees that it doesn't have enough AS on these energy storage resources. If it has to force the no pay, it sees that it needs additional AS.
Yeah, I think I've got James Lynn on the line, and he may be able to best address some of these questions. James, are you on?
Yeah, Gabe, I was able to jump over. Hey, Perry. Hey, Gabe. There's a little bit of a misconception here about the no pay. No pay is an after-the-fact functionality. I think what you're trying to talk about, Perry, is what we call disqualification. If you're awarded regulation or ancillary services in the day-ahead market, you're required to self-schedule that AS back into real time. If you don't, the market will automatically put in a self-schedule for you, unless an operator goes in and disqualifies that ancillary service for resource-specific physical reasons like an outage or transmission outages reasons. We have done that on storage resources sometimes, but if it's not an operator action to disqualify it, it'll show up in the 15-minute market as expected to still be delivered, and we will not go out and reprocure additional regulation. And so that's one of the areas that I think has to be future discussion, is whether or not ancillary services needs to be in an imbalance, like a reprocurement in real time. But right now, it's not being reprocured in real time. You're expected to come from your day-ahead award. You're expected to deal in real time, and we only procure additional requirements in the 15-minute market.
That's really helpful, James. So what's going on then is you'll be running low, and today an operator has to see it, disqualify it, and then up the AS requirement in order to force the market to buy more from the available AS bids. Is that right?
Well, as soon as it disqualifies it, it will reprocure it based upon the AS bids. It'll basically set your awards to zero. So
Okay.
then we'll go reprocure
and then it realizes
it someplace
needs
else.
more. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but that still takes, the point is, that still takes an operator action to look at that AS due to the SOC constraint and then say, oh, I have to disqualify this because there's not enough state of charge.
Yep. And it has to be done between the day-ahead market clearing and running 15-minute market.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I go back to kind of what I said, and then I'll add one more thing. It seems that if this is happening a lot, and you're thinking about requiring energy bids or proposing it here, it usually means there's a pricing problem. Some reason why these resources don't want to also provide the energy bids. And one reason might be that the no pay looks okay to them. If you actually needed to reprocure the reg at a real-time price when reg is looking a little bit more scarce because these resources can't provide it anymore, the reg price will go up, and they won't do that anymore. But that would require, a full-on reoptimization, reprocurement in the real-time market to tackle that. I think you get part of the way there with your filing with FERC, because at least they won't be getting the BCR for it, and they might start reflecting that in their day-ahead AS bids. But okay, I'll leave it there. This was a very helpful conversation for me. Thank you for taking so much time with me, Gabe, and thanks, James.
No, my pleasure, Perry.
You're welcome.
I think these are tricky issues, and I think you're right. I think thinking more and digging in more into the root causes is important, because then hopefully that'll drive the correct solution to be implemented. So I do appreciate the comments and the feedback. Operator, any other hands in the queue right now?
Hi, Bill. Hi, Gabe. Sorry. Yes, we do have Kelly Wells.
All right, great.
Hey, Gabe, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I won't take much time because I think the prior conversations kind of hit a lot of what I was going to ask, but I did want to focus a little bit more on what is being proposed in the day-ahead market. So first, I appreciate the clarification that you guys are not requiring energy bids in the day-ahead market, but it sounds like you're still restricting the awards that a storage resource can be awarded for regulation. And it looks like the formula in your paper also restricts spin and non-spin. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, you know where we stand on this one, so I won't go into the details, but yeah, we just having the changed state of charge formulation, which, we support, that's definitely a move forward, an improvement into what's currently in the market today. But having that, in addition to restricting the amount of regulation that these resources can be awarded, it's almost duplicative in our minds, and it seems to be a little bit of an overkill. I think when you modify the state of charge constraint, you're going to address a lot of the issues. In real time, you'll have the energy bids available to move that resource around in real time if it needs to. I wonder if maybe a more streamlined approach would be look at possibly changing or adding logic into the AGC and how it decides which resources to actually deploy up and down might make more sense than restricting what they can be awarded in the first place. And this kind of goes back to why I asked at the beginning for additional documentation on how the AGC actually works, because, I mean, clearly there's a way to add logic in the AGC itself that looks at state of charge. You guys have that in there for the regulation energy management resources. So have you guys thought about adding something like that in for all storage resources? I know REM keeps them right at about 50%. So maybe for non-REM, it would just make sure they're not ever, have a state of charge where they can't support their regulation. That to me seems a more direct approach to addressing the concern rather than, again, being overly restrictive on what they're awarded in the first place.
Yeah, I think we have thought a little bit about this. I do think a solution in that space gets very complicated very quickly, because, let's say you do have a storage resource and you're relying on it for 100, maybe 200 megawatts of regulation up, and that storage resource doesn't have sufficient state of charge to be able to support, very many intervals of being dispatched at particularly high levels of regulation. So maybe in the AGC logic, you update it to say, okay, well, avoid using the resources that have high or low amounts of state of charge and make the rest of the resources, basically do more work when they're providing regulation. I don't know, it seems a little bit unfair, rules like that to me, where you're now sort of relying on, one set of resources kind of gets preferential treatment while other resources kind of have to do more of and provide more of the ancillary services. I do think that is a potential solution, but maybe you want to compensate a little bit differently for something like that or something. So yeah, I think we've thought about those a little bit, but I think at this point that's not the proposal that we're thinking about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and that's why I think, again, understanding how AGC decides which resources to deploy for regulation would be kind of the first step. So I think, maybe a more practical approach to this is not restrict the awards in the day-ahead market, continue moving forward with the modified state of charge constraint, have the, real-time energy bid requirement, and then monitor. Like, honestly, I think you should see that the concern that you are trying to address by restricting the awards, for the most part, I suspect will get addressed just by those two changes alone. Mm-hmm. And then you can take, okay, let's look at AGC. Let's look at if this is still an issue, and if, what's the, what's the best way to approach that. Restricting the regulation awards, it just seems, again, overkill. And again, I won't go into the details. We've communicated that to you guys from day one. But I appreciate the additional examples in the paper. I'm still working through them. But yeah, just wanted to voice that question or that thought out here today.
Yeah, I think that's good feedback. We definitely appreciate that. We'll continue to keep this in mind, Kelly. Thanks for bringing this up again. I do appreciate it. Okay, Brenda, any other hands right now?
We do not have any hands raised at this time. Thank you, Gabe.
Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide then. This is item number 3, and this has to do with exceptional dispatch on the system. And I know, like all these topics, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about this. So I'm not going into all the details in this presentation, but kind of covering this at the high level. We are proposing a new form of exceptional dispatch. This new form of exceptional dispatch will allow operators to go out and specify that specific storage resources hold state of charge. So instead of a dispatch instruction, for example, today, maybe, hey, I need particular resource A, to move to 100 megawatts and hold 100 megawatts for a particular amount of time because I need energy on the system from their location. This would be a little bit different. It would be or allow functionality for our operators to say, gee, I need 100 megawatt hours from a particular storage resource, and I need that storage resource to hold at least 100 megawatt hours in between, let's say 10 a.m. and noon or something like that, so that when noon comes around, I know that I have some state of charge in this fleet, particularly, potentially for a local area issue, potentially for a system area issue, potentially just because, we need state of charge from this particular resource for reliability purposes. So obviously this kind of a rule implies different compensation than the current rules. Current rules specify that you sort of get paid for the energy that you're exceptionally dispatched to at a compensation of what you're bidding or what the prevailing market price is. For the compensation for this new exceptional dispatch, we're going to be thinking about opportunity costs. So if a resource would have preferred to be discharged during those intervals when the ISO is effectively holding it back from discharge by saying, hey, look, you have to hold a certain amount of state of charge, and then later in the day when that resource is actually discharging, prices are lower, what we're going to do is, and what we're proposing in the policy, is to compensate at the difference between the prices that the resource would have actually gotten paid at in the market for energy compared to the opportunity of energy costs that they could have been discharged at if they're higher during that exceptional dispatch period. And we've done some work to provide how this methodology would actually work and how the calculations would actually be carried out in the paper. yeah, again, I'm not planning to go through any examples or any details here unless we get specific questions on it. But I will pause and see if there's any questions or feedback on this particular aspect of the policy, just with the note that in the comments and feedback that we've gotten from stakeholders on the draft final proposal, this wasn't, we didn't get a whole lot of feedback saying, hey, we should change the proposal on this aspect of the policy. So Brenda, any hands raised or questions in the queue?
We do have a question from Alva. Just confirming, Alva, your hand's raised, so go ahead and.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had one pretty straightforward question here, Gabe. I just wanted to double check. So in one scenario I could certainly see happening relatively frequently is that the ISO could charge a unit, charge a battery out of the money as far as its bid is concerned, to get it to a given state of charge and then not actually use the battery. So in that case, I'm assuming that the way this calculation would then work is that it would simply be compensated for its charging because there would be no discharge in either case. Is that correct? Because I just saw discharge being mentioned in the description. I just wanted to double check that that's how charging would be handled.
Yeah, that's essentially correct. So when the market is actually going to issue exceptional dispatches, they're either going to be categorized into, hey, this is sort of part of the exceptional dispatch to hold state of charge, or it could potentially be, hey, I'm giving this resource an energy award to get to a particular state of charge. And if it's the latter, the compensation is still going to be the same as it is today. So if you're actively charging or the ISO is telling you to discharge, you're still going to get compensated at the higher of the bid or the prevailing LMP, or in the case of charging energy, it would be the lower of the, because it's a negative energy award. But then again, if you're holding energy, so effectively a 0 megawatt dispatch instruction, or maybe a very minor, very low dispatch instruction, because state of charge can fluctuate a little bit over time. Those instructions would be compensated at that opportunity cost.
Okay. And would you consider the case where the CAISO causes a resource to charge prematurely and then the resource misses an opportunity to charge at much lower prices? That would also be covered under this sort of analysis?
So yeah, if the resource is holding state of charge, and you're holding state of charge, and you sort of miss out on opportunities to arbitrage, buying stuff, that would be compensated under this methodology.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Alva. Brenda, any other hands or comments in queue?
No more comments in queue at this time.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's go ahead on to aspect number 4 of the policy. Again, I think this is one of the aspects of the policy that we've really, I think, evolved our thinking over the course of the proposals that we put out there. And initially, I think there was a little bit of reluctance to implement something like this. I think there's still some feedback from some stakeholders that perhaps we're thinking a little bit too much about contractual obligations for resources versus what resources are physically capable of doing. But I think the other side of those arguments are, well, if we need resources to join the grid and get financing to be allowed to join the grid and actually build resources, put steel in the ground, those kinds of things, we need to put at least some modeling considerations in place for how these resources can be accommodated to do that. And I think that this policy goes in that direction and takes some steps in that direction, and is something worthwhile to actually be developed and implemented. So what we're proposing here is optional, fully electable functionality for storage resources So if you are a storage resource and if you want to restrict the amount of, what's known as quote unquote grid charging, you're able to do this through this functionality. And what that means is there won't be any energy awards at the facility level. So this could be co-located solar plus co-located storage or any other co-located resources for energy to be flowing from the grid to the facility, obviously typically to charge a co-located storage resource that would have a negative operating range. This functionality would be electable on an hourly basis. So if you wanted to have one particular hour, say hour ending 10, where you didn't want to have grid charging, so no flows from the grid to the facility, but then other hours of the day, you could allow flows from the grid to the facility. Maybe this would be advantageous overnight when if you're a solar plus storage, you're not going to have any output from your solar, but you may find economic incentives to charge because prices may be sufficiently low, and then you could have stated charge available to meet the morning peak. That would be functionality that would be allowed under this proposal. This functionality will apply in both the day-ahead markets and the real-time markets. So again, you can specify a specific set of hours in the day-ahead market when you want this functionality to apply, and then you could specify potentially a different set of hours in the real-time market when you want this functionality to apply to the resource. I guess it's the fourth sub-bullet, is italicized, meaning it's a slight change from the previous version of the proposal, but we are suggesting that co-located renewables that aren't scheduled in the day-ahead market, we could substitute forecast data instead of their schedules to determine what would be used in the constraint in the day-ahead market. So if I'm a solar resource and I'm co-located with a storage resource and I don't want to schedule or bid into the day-ahead market and I only want to participate in the real-time market, the ISO can use the forecast for that resource to potentially restrict charging schedules for the co-located storage resources during particular hours during the time when the solar could be available. This functionality doesn't preclude self-schedule, so if the storage resource just wants to schedule to charge for a certain amount of megawatts during a particular hour, that's fine. We're not going to be checking that those self-schedules follow any particular set of rules. If you want to self-schedule, you can, and you can self-schedule at any level within the operational range of the storage resources. Also, we are including, and we've talked a lot about this in the paper, but we are including the functionality for storage resources to, quote unquote, back down or reduce the amount of charging that they're performing if the renewable doesn't meet a schedule. So let's say, in the real-time market, a particular storage or the ISO forecasts that a solar resource will be generating at 35 megawatts. We give it a schedule of 35 megawatts. We also schedule the storage resource to charge at 35 megawatts. Well, if in the operating range of that 5-minute interval, during one particular split second, the solar array is actually only putting out 32 megawatts instead of 35 megawatts, then we do allow that storage resource to back down at that exact instance down to 32 to match whatever's coming off of the solar resource. If that functionality has been selected for the hour, if the functionality isn't selected, obviously the storage resource would still have to follow its dispatch instructions, but we would make this allowance for co-located solar and storage resources in the event that the renewable isn't meeting its scheduled amount of energy because of availability, solar availability, wind availability, whatever it is. So, okay, any questions on aspect number 4 of the policy?
We do have 3 hands raised. So from those hands raised, just make sure for the question that Gabe just asked, we can call on Susan Schneider first.
Hi, Gabe. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. First of all, I want to thank you very much for developing this option, something LSA has been supporting pretty much since day one, and really, really glad that CAISO's come around and is providing this functionality. So it may or may not be needed less because there may be less storage charging restrictions maybe from the Inflation Reduction Act, but still some certain projects will need this, as we said in our comments, and we appreciate your proceeding with this. I did have one question. When you said that in real time the storage can back down at that instant, I think we're thinking maybe it might be more within, say, a 5-minute or 15-minute interval to notice that is actually happening in some, is not just a blip and just, anyway, just a little more flexibility than some might be implied by in that instance. I'm not sure if you know what that would be, but certainly not any less than 5 minutes or 15 minutes, we would think.
Oh, so I think we're thinking about intra 5-minute intervals here. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That's all I had. Really appreciate your efforts on this.
Well, thanks for the feedback, Susan. I really appreciate that. And I, too, am hopeful about what's going to come out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and hopefully that means less storage with restrictions on how it can charge and behave in the market.
Yes. That's everyone's hope.
Okay, Brenda, next question, please.
Yes, Chris Devon from CES. Your line is unmuted.
Hey, Gabe. This is Chris from Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right?
Morning, Chris. Yeah, I can hear you well.
Great. Morning. So I won't belabor the arguments I made against this stuff before. I think you guys pointed out the reasons why I need to move forward on some of the stuff with the contractual obligations. So understood on that. Just wanted to understand the functionality a little bit more. In general, I think you guys explained it about the settlements piece, that it's not going to adjust the market awards or, have changes to settlements. Basically, if the resource backs down, it would still be, having to be associated with those unrestricted imbalance energy and other allocations related to that sort of thing. So kind of my question is, with this addition of the linking the resources to the kind of the DOT of the solar or renewable component or other co-located resource, is that going to be done like through the market software? It's going to see what the other resources and somehow link them together?
Yeah. I think that the very simple answer is yes. So we've got functionality in our master file parameters today that tell us which resources are co-located with other resources. So we know if solar resource A and storage resource A are co-located resources, and basically, and we use that relationship to build our aggregate capability constraints today, which we already impose on co-located facilities. So this is going to look, actual implementation, barring the business requirements, which we're still developing right now. What this is going to do is essentially be very similar to a new aggregate capability constraint that's basically going to set a floor at 0. It's going to say, okay, I never want to schedule, solar resource A plus storage resource A at anything less than 0 megawatts during the hours when this particular functionality is checked. And then it'll just be another constraint that our market enforces, like the rest of the constraints.
Okay, so I'm just curious as far as like the actual market awards go and the settlements in that sense. I mean, if it does actually link it like in the AGC or the ACC as aggregate capability constraint, then it would actually reduce the storage award from the market, right?
Yeah. The awards are still, the awards for the storage resource and the solar resource are still going to be done primarily in the same way that they're done today. So, you could get an award for 35 megawatts from the solar resource. You could get an award for 35 megawatts for the 35 for the solar, 35 to charge for the storage. So positive 35, negative 35. But what this constraint would effectively do is never schedule that resource to charge more than 35 megawatts. So you wouldn't get like a schedule to charge at 40 megawatts or something. So then once you've got that schedule, this final bullet on the page says, well, we understand that sometimes the solar resources might deviate a little bit. They might not actually be able to produce 35 megawatts during this specific 5-minute interval, even though the forecast says it can produce 35. So maybe it can only produce 32. Well, in that instance, if the storage resource backs down from actually charging at 35 megawatts to 32 megawatts, that's going to be uninstructed imbalance energy. It's not going to be, the compensation is still going to be the same as it would be for any other resource that was scheduled at a particular amount and didn't quite meet that amount in the real-time market when it was actually providing energy, or in this case, charge.
Okay, I'm nodding here. That all makes sense. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, just a couple more real quick. I think in the day ahead, when you say that it will add the day ahead, or you will now utilize the forecast from the renewable to set the kind of upper bound. Mm-hmm. What if the renewable is bid in at a higher amount than what its forecast would be?
So it would use the schedule for the storage, the renewable resource.
Okay, so whatever comes out of the market award from that, not necessarily just it would only use that day ahead forecast in lieu of if there's no bids in the market.
Correct.
From that renewable. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, and then the last thing was just on that hour-by-hour thing, on the selectability of that. I'm not quite sure if I totally agree with them being able to flip-flop back between having that turn on or off, but I guess I would say, how often is that going to be selectable? Is that part of like the day-ahead market cyber system where you select that?
It'd probably be, again, we need to develop this in the business requirements, and that has not been done yet. But it'd probably be selectable through like biddable, hourly bids that come to the ISO, something like that. But we haven't worked out those details yet.
Okay, but do you think it'd be likely that it would be, you'd have to select it in the day-ahead market time frame and then it'd be set into real time, or would you be able to potentially adjust that again in real time?
I think we're anticipating to adjust this again in real time right now.
Okay. So give a little bit more flexibility. Yeah, I guess I would just see, maybe it would be something good to ask MSC about, frankly. I just don't know if there's, or maybe DMN, but it just seems like it might not really need to have that much flexibility potentially, but I'm not sure. So anyhow, that's just something I wanted a little bit more clarity on. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you for those explanations. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for the comments, Chris. Appreciate it.
And lastly, we have Alva. We can go ahead and get his line unmuted on number 4.
Thank you, Brenda. Gabe, just question is the co-located battery eligible or to be categorized as flexible RA?
Yeah, it can qualify for flex RA.
But only for its discharge range, is that correct?
It can actually qualify for the full operating range of the resource, so from PMIN to PMAX.
Yeah, but isn't that a 7x24 requirement?
It is.
So how can that be made consistent with this?
Yeah, the flex bidding requirements are a requirement to bid the resource into the market. It's not necessarily a requirement to provide energy or anything like that. So as long as the resource is capable of bidding all 24/7, so probably, it may not be the resources that are falling into this bucket that can't charge overnight, that sort of thing, if you're a co-located solar plus storage resource. But those are the requirements for bidding rules for the resources. There's also different categories of flexibility, and those different categories can imply different requirements on what the resources actually have to perform. And I know we've had some internal discussion, and I think there's been some external information that's been posted about that. And I could, if you want, Alva, we could certainly follow up and have an offline conversation about what those requirements mean.
That's just in concept. You're saying they don't necessarily. They can have an energy bid and have no intention of being able to satisfy it based on using this model, because this is something they've signed on to it's in the master file.
I see what you're getting at.
As far as energy is concerned, your opinion would be that they can provide bids and have no intention of being able to actually charge per those bids. That's your belief at this point.
Well, yeah. Let me rephrase here. I think, um, today, I think the expectations are that if you're bidding into the market, that you're able to respond to bids into the market. So you certainly could have situations where I'm a co-located storage resource and I only want a grid charge and I've got an on-site solar resource and the on-site solar resource is not producing anything overnight. So I think the ISO would anticipate that a resource like that would not be bidding charging capability in the middle of the night. I think you obviously have other resources, standalone storage resources, that could be bidding charging overnight because, if prices are right and, grid prices are negative, gee, I want to charge up and basically have free energy or negatively priced energy. And I think for those standalone resources, they certainly could meet the bidding obligations for flex resource adequacy. I think for resources that have these restrictions on when they can charge effectively, I think that you'd really
that's specifically what I'm asking about. Yeah, not the co-located model.
To say that they could qualify for flex for their full range of operations.
Okay. So you think that probably it's unlikely that a resource that was actually specifically electing to avoid grid charging could elect to provide flexible RA. That was my question. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know that, since the ISO has done sort of a comprehensive look at resource adequacy, batteries have really become a new thing. So when we had initially opened up the Resource Adequacy Enhancements Initiative, one of the aspects of that policy was really to dive into all the different ways that storage resources could provide resource adequacy. And I think one of the purposes of that policy was to answer questions like this and to specifically spell out, hey, storage resources can provide this, but they can't provide that. Obviously, that aspect of the policy or that particular policy has been put on hold. I am told that, and I think this is going to be part of the roadmap, the policy roadmap that the ISO publishes in the next few weeks. But part of that roadmap is going to say, hey, look, here's our timeline for when we're going to start to think about resource adequacy. And part of thinking about resource adequacy and the policy related to it is going to be addressing some of those questions like you're asking. So I do think that is at the forefront of our minds as grid operators, and we are going to get into some of those details in some of the policy that we're talking about in the next few years.
Right. But those would be changes because I think it would seem like I think the current business practice manual description, which is consistent with what you're saying, I think is pretty clear.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Good question, Alva. Okay. Brenda, any other questions or comments?
I did have a question for someone who keeps putting their hand up, but it seems like they're going to have their hand down for this moment. So we'll get back to them if they do have a question.
Okay.
So he said he's good. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're sort of we're kind of in the home stretch here. Number 5, this is the next slide, is talking about our policy on pseudo-tie resources. There has also been a request from stakeholders to allow pseudo-tie functionality or co-located functionality for pseudo-tie resources. So you've got a storage resource and a solar resource that are at the same facility, but that facility happens to be outside of, for example, the California Balancing Authority area, and the owners of that facility, the combined resources, want to model their resource as co-located. Let's say it's a 100 megawatt solar, 50 megawatt storage resource. They only have 100 megawatts of interconnection. They only have 100 megawatts of firm transmission rights from their location where they're interconnecting to the ISO border, but they want to be modeled as, a pair of co-located resources, and they never want the dispatch for those resources to go above 100 megawatts because that would not only violate their interconnection, but it would also violate the amount of firm transmission that they have from their location to the ISO. So I think all we're saying here, and frankly, this has been one of the least contested and least talked about aspects of the policy, but what we're saying here is that with the right rules and the right understandings in place, the two other resources outside of the California BAA have to be in the same balancing authority area. That balancing authority area has to agree to allowing these resources to participate in the ISO markets as a pseudo-tie resource with the co-located functionality. But with all that in place and the changes that we have to make to the rules on our end, I think we're basically saying, yes, we're going to allow this functionality. Yeah. Okay. Any comments or questions on this? This is a relatively easier aspect of the policy. If there's no hands, Brenda, let's just go ahead to slide 6.
Okay.
Okay, or policy number 6, slide 9. The proposal does make a small change to the day-ahead default energy bid. I understand that we have received, even when we were negotiating and talking about what the default energy bid for storage resources was going to look like in the ESDR 4 initiative, which was, 3 years ago at this point, part of that discussion, I think there was some discussion around ways that we could potentially make the default energy bid better. I think the way that the default energy bid is characterized today is sort of, one methodology to get an idea out there and to be able to start using a default energy bid. But it wasn't necessarily the best solution or not necessarily a solution that everybody completely bought in 100% of the way on. I think with this specific policy, this item was brought up very late in the game in terms of policy development. And I think what we didn't want to do is bog down this policy in discussing other ways we could potentially improve the default energy bid. And with that said, we don't necessarily want to say that we're never going to look at the default energy bid for storage resources, but at this point in this policy, that's not what we think we should prioritize. The ISO still offers, obviously, the negotiated default energy bid. So if there are market participants that feel the negotiated default energy bid today doesn't quite cover all their needs and they want to make that justification to the team here at the ISO, you can still do that, and that's still an avenue that's open. We also fully appreciate that there are some concerns about the way that the default energy bid is constructed today. Again, I don't think the ISO wants to necessarily open up this policy to address necessarily all of those specific items. What we're really thinking about here is an aspect of the policy that says, do we want to add in an opportunity cost term into the day-ahead default energy bid or not? And I think, given the feedback that we've heard from stakeholders, given the input from the Market Surveillance Committee, the Department of Market Monitoring, given actual data that we've observed, and I think in the paper we mentioned one specific day, but this has actually happened on a number of days, and there have been stakeholders who have commented, hey, this has happened to me on a number of days, this is really important that the ISO address it. We are planning and proposing to update just the day-ahead default energy bid and just add this one opportunity cost term into that day-ahead default energy bid. I think one of the areas that we had talked about is, how are we going to estimate this opportunity cost term? We had talked about potentially using the previous day-ahead market results. We talked about potentially using results from the market power mitigation run. And I think from some internal analysis that we've completed and from feedback that we've gotten from stakeholders, it seems like the prevailing winds are to use the market power mitigation run from the same day-ahead market run as we are actually calculating the default energy bids for. So that's what we've got in the proposal. Yeah, and again, I think we understand and acknowledge that there could be iterations and improvements on both the formulation for the default energy bid. There's probably other ways to calculate what this opportunity cost might look like, and there certainly could be biases for the opportunity cost because we are using the market power mitigation run. Market results could necessarily be higher than they would have otherwise been in the actual day-ahead market run because we haven't applied market power mitigation yet. So once we apply market power mitigation, those prices could come down. Yeah, I think with all that taking all that into consideration, that's kind of where we're at with the proposal. Again, it hasn't changed a whole lot from the draft final proposal. I think we want to be very transparent about where we're at and why we're picking what we're picking, and then move forward. And again, we could potentially iterate on this in the future. So Brenda, this is all the slides that I've got. I will take questions on this particular aspect of the policy, and then after that, I'll open it up to questions on any aspect of the policy, and then I'll turn it over to you for concluding remarks. Do we have any hands up in the queue right now?
We do not have any hands up at the moment, so if those who are on the phone line, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand icon above your chat window, as well as submit them through chat. Gabriel will be taking any questions at this time. So for those on the call, y'all are muted. Just want to give you guys a heads up. And on the phone line, press #2 to ask a question.
Yeah, if we don't have any questions, let's go ahead through next steps, and then we'll circle back around one final time and see if there's any questions or comments.
Of course, Gabe. So for today's next steps for this final proposal, we will be asking for questions in the commenting tool that are due by November 15, 2022. We will be having that comment tool available this afternoon to submit comments and questions. Feel free to utilize the questions and ask them in each box, but also if there's any other questions outside of that, please address them in there. And then we also have the presentation posted under Energy Storage Enhancements, as well as the paper as a PDF version. And then other than that, I don't see any other questions coming up at this time. Just wanted to highlight that we do have our stakeholder symposium coming up in less than a few weeks on November 9th and 10th. And if you registered, thank you so much for those who have. We look forward to seeing you. And we do have a question from Chris Devon. Gabe, let's go ahead and take Chris Devon from CES.
Hey, Gabe, it's Chris from CES again. I just had a question about maybe next steps on storage in general and the new initiative that's going to look at the SR model and that stuff. I don't know if you had mentioned that earlier. If you did, I apologize. I didn't catch that. Are you guys planning to kick that off sometime soon, like at the beginning of the next year in Q1, or what's the plan for that?
Yeah, so good thought there, Chris. Yeah, I did mention a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but I think it's worth following back up on here. We obviously have work that we're going to be doing on the ancillary service stated charge constraint initiative, so that'll sort of be the next thing that's up. I do want to get back to storage modeling enhancements, though, which includes changing the model. It includes the foldback issue. We might try to get the local issues in there, which already sounds very big. But I would like to have at least one stakeholder workshop, hopefully sometime this year. If we can't get it in this year, obviously I'd want to pick that up early in Q1 2023. But there's a lot of other competing policy issues that I know are demanding time from our stakeholders. So I think it's a question of when we can get those scheduled, but I want to pick that up as soon as possible and hopefully get policy on storage modeling enhancements developed sometime in 2023 and get that to the Board of Governors then.
Okay, that's helpful. And I think just to comment a little bit on your point about the workshops or potential to maybe do some additional working groups or things like that. I do support that idea, especially now. I think we did a few of those back at the beginning of this initiative, and it seemed to be a good venue for stakeholders to kind of put in their thoughts about what they wanted to do. But I guess maybe I would suggest for this next round, perhaps if the CAISO could maybe come up with some ideas about what they think they're going to do on some of these proposals, maybe issue spot some of the tough parts about like the ESR model that we talked a lot about with the MSC, and maybe, you know, some of the things on like the local, some of those other artifacts of the last efforts, and maybe re-raise those like an issue paper, but actually have a workshop where people can have more of an open discussion before CAISO says, you know, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is our proposal. I think that would really help facilitate a broader discussion and try to link in stuff like how does it link to day-ahead market enhancements? How does this link to the RA reform efforts at the PUC? How are we going to, you know, adjust some of these things for NGR and maybe do ESR? And I know there's a lot on your guys' plate, so I just think perhaps maybe doing something that's a little bit more informal before we move into a formalized, here's the straw proposal, let's, you know, move forward quickly to get to the final proposal stage. I think that would be more helpful perhaps to kind of open up the dialogue in advance of the actual proposals being provided. So I really welcome or encourage you guys to maybe welcome that or think about doing that. But I'll leave it at that. So thanks for the additional info and opportunity to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that's the plan. Yeah, we'll see how it works out, but I'd like to do that too. I think it'd be worthwhile. Okay, any other hands up, Brenda?
We do have Alva. Alva, let's go ahead and take your question.
I had one other, talking about interacting initiatives. One concern, Gabe, is I think that the state of charge constraints, you're intending to have these implemented at the end of next year. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's kind of your timeline. And I'm concerned about it overlapping with the way in which DAME has proposed to implement something similar, which I think is actually, I think their implementation is a little overweening. It's basically, you know, they're going to swamp the application that you've developed with a restriction having to do with flexible, with the imbalance reserves that could make it very difficult to tell whether, I mean, I sort of consider your solution to be an effective one because it makes things better versus where they are now. Whereas what's being proposed for DAME is perhaps something that's, you know, they're looking at something, at an issue, a legitimate issue having to do with a new form of reserve. But I'm concerned that that implementation happening at the same time is going to swamp and make it difficult to tell whether this is effective. So I just wanted to raise that concern that the two things are on exactly the same timeline and potentially could very much interfere with validating, cross-validation between the two approaches.
Yeah, I agree with that, and you know, we've had some internal discussion about that, and I think, yeah, I think we're gonna have to think hard about how we want to implement these things, and maybe there's still some opportunity to iterate on the day-ahead market enhancements proposal
Right.
to really nail down, you know, what we need to get from storage resources out of that initiative for the products that they're offering, and, you know, how that impacts this initiative and the changes we're proposing here.
I agree. Anyway, just wanted to raise that point. Thank you, Gabe.
I think that's a good one, Alva. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, any other comments?
We don't have any more questions. Thank you, Gabe, except for that one that I sent to you offline. I believe you'll take care of that later. And so with that, I believe we are ready to conclude this call. I will go ahead and allow Chris, my event producer, end our call for today. Thank you, everyone, and have a happy Halloween.